Love wasn't supposed to be this complicated. For as long as I could remember, I had been raised in a world where wealth dictated everything. My family wasn't just rich. We were old money, the kind of people who valued status over substance, connections over character. My entire life had been carefully planned out for me. Elite schools, extravagant social events, and eventually, a marriage to someone of equal social standing. But then I met Liam. And suddenly everything changed. I wasn't supposed to fall for someone like him. Liam was different from the men my family expected me to marry. He wasn't born into privilege, he didn't come from a family of investors or politicians. He was a simple, hardworking man, kind, ambitious, and full of life in a way that made my world feel small in comparison. I met him by accident in the least extravagant place possible, a small bookstore tucked away in the corner of the city. I had gone there to escape a suffocating gala my parents had forced me to attend, desperate for a moment of quiet. Liam had been there, running his fingers over the spines of old novels, lost in thought. When he noticed me, he smiled, not the rehearsed, calculated smile of a man raised in high society, but a real, genuine one. "You look like someone who's hiding," he had said, amused. I had laughed. "And you look like someone who doesn't belong in a place this expensive." He grinned. "Guess we both don't belong then." That was how it started. A conversation that turned into another. A chance meeting that turned into coffee dates. And before I knew it, I was falling. Falling for his warmth, for his laughter, for the way he saw me not as an heiress but as a person. For the first time in my life I felt free. And that was the problem. I had known from the beginning that my family wouldn't approve. But I had hoped, desperately hoped, that they would see Liam the way I did. That they would understand that love wasn't about money. That wealth couldn't measure the depth of a person's heart. I had never been more wrong. The dinner was a disaster before it even started. My father barely looked at him. My mother's lips remained pursed in disapproval. And my older brother, who had always been the most brutally honest, made no effort to hide his disgust. "So," my father said after a long, tension-filled silence, "tell us about yourself, Liam." Liam, ever the optimist, smiled politely. "Of course, sir. I'm currently working at a small tech company, but I have big plans for the future. I'm building something of my own, an innovative software project that I truly believe in." Silence. Then my mother scoffed. "In other words, you have nothing." Liam's smile faltered, but he held his ground. "I wouldn't say that. Success isn't about where you start, but where you're willing to go." My brother chuckled, shaking his head. Spoken like someone who has no idea how the real world works. I clenched my fists under the table. "That's enough." But my father wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his expression turning cold. "And how exactly do you plan to provide for my daughter? Because she was raised in a world you will never understand. She has expectations. A life that requires more than just ambition." Liam met his gaze without flinching. "I don't plan to provide for her. I plan to build a life with her." I had never been more proud of him. But my family saw it as an insult. My mother sighed dramatically. "This is ridiculous. Darling, surely you don't think this will last." I reached for Liam's hand, gripping it tightly. "I love him." My father's face hardened. "Then you're a fool." After dinner, my parents pulled me aside. "You will end this," my father demanded. I shook my head. "No." He exhaled sharply. "Then you will leave this family." I froze. "What?" "If you insist on choosing this fantasy, then you are no longer our daughter," he continued. "We will not support you. We will not acknowledge you. We will not be there when you realize your mistake." My stomach twisted. "You're serious?" My mother gave me a pitying look. "One day you'll understand. And when that day comes, we won't be here to catch you." They weren't bluffing. They truly meant it. That night I packed my things. I walked out of my family's mansion with nothing but a suitcase and Liam's hand in mine. I left behind luxury, security, and the only life I had ever known. And as terrifying as it was, I didn't regret it. Because for the first time I wasn't choosing money. I was choosing love. And I prayed that it would be enough. But love alone doesn't put food on the table. And soon I would realize that the road ahead was much harder than I ever could have imagined. I had always thought that love would be enough. That no matter what happened, as long as Liam and I had each other, we could face anything. But when I walked out of my family's mansion that night, disowned, abandoned, and cut off from everything I had ever known, The reality of my choice began to settle in. I had chosen love. But in doing so I had lost everything else. The night we left, we had nowhere to go. Liam held my hand tightly as we walked down the street, but for the first time, I felt the weight of what I had done pressing down on me. I had left behind a life of privilege, comfort, and security. Now, I was just another person in the world trying to survive. Liam had tried to reassure me. "We'll be okay," he had said, his voice full of hope. "I promise." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But as the hours passed and we struggled to find a place to stay, I realized that love alone wasn't enough to keep the cold away. True to their word, my parents wasted no time in making sure I understood the full consequences of my decision. They froze my bank accounts, revoked my credit cards. Even the car I had been driving was suddenly taken back. It had never been mine, just another thing loaned to me by my family, and now they were taking it all away. I had nothing. No money. No home. No support. And they didn't care. Not once did my mother call to check if I was okay. Not once did my father offer me a second chance. I had ceased to exist in their world. After crashing at a friend's place for a few nights, Liam finally found us an apartment. If you could call it that. It was tiny, run-down, barely bigger than a storage unit. The ceiling leaked when it rained. The floors creaked with every step. The walls were thin enough that we could hear every argument from the neighbors. But it was ours. And for Liam it was a start. He smiled as he set down the single bag of clothes he owned. "It's not much now, but just wait. We'll turn this place into a home." I tried to smile back, but all I could see were the cracks in the walls. I wasn't used to this. To struggling. To not having enough. And for the first time I wondered if I had made a mistake. The first few weeks were the hardest. I had never had to work before. Never had to worry about money, food, or rent. Now every dollar counted. Every meal was planned. Every bill was a reminder of how far I had fallen. Liam worked long hours at a job that barely paid enough to cover the rent while I tried to find work of my own. And slowly the stress began to eat away at us. I hated myself for it, but resentment started to creep in. "I left everything for you," I snapped one night after another bill arrived. "More money that we didn't have. And now we can barely afford to eat." Liam's expression darkened. "I never asked you to give up your family." I froze, hurt flashing across my face. "You're right. I chose this. But that doesn't mean it isn't hard." His shoulders sagged. He ran a hand through his messy dark brown hair, exhaustion clear in his deep hazel eyes. "I know. But we'll get through this. Together." He always said that. And I wanted to believe it. But at night as I lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, I couldn't stop wondering. What if my parents were right? I tried not to think about my family. Tried not to wonder if they ever missed me. But every time I walked past a designer boutique, every time I saw a socialite on TV talking about the latest gala, I felt it, the sting of everything I had lost. I missed the security. I missed the comfort. I missed not having to worry if we could afford groceries next week. And yet, even in my worst moments, I never called them. Because I knew what they would say. "We told you so." They were waiting for me to fail. Waiting for me to crawl back, begging for forgiveness. But no matter how hard things got, I refused to give them the satisfaction. One evening I sat by the window looking out at the city skyline, feeling the weight of everything we were going through. Liam came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "I know this isn't the life you're used to," he murmured. "And I know it's been hard. But I swear to you I'm going to build something better. For us." I turned to look at him, at the man who had never wavered, never doubted, never once regretted choosing me. And I realized something. I hadn't chosen wrong. I had chosen love. And even if love couldn't pay the bills, it was still worth more than any inheritance. I cupped his face, forcing him to meet my gaze. "We'll figure it out. Together." His hazel eyes softened. "Always." And at that moment I knew. I hadn't lost everything. I had everything that truly mattered. But life was about to test us in ways we never expected. Because poverty wasn't just a struggle, it was a fight. And we were about to find out if our love was strong enough to survive. Love alone couldn't pay the bills. That was the first brutal lesson I learned after leaving my privileged life behind. There were no chauffeurs, no five-star restaurants, no designer shopping sprees. Instead, there was cold apartment floors, empty refrigerators, and the constant weight of financial anxiety. Every morning, Liam and I woke up to a reality that neither of us had been prepared for. And as much as I wanted to believe we could survive anything, I started to understand that survival wasn't romantic. It was exhausting. Liam had always been a dreamer. He believed in hard work, perseverance, and success. But dreams didn't pay rent. And rent was due. We had moved into the cheapest apartment we could afford. A single-room space with peeling paint, broken heating, and a shared bathroom in the hallway. Every night, I lay awake listening to the leaky faucet dripping endlessly. Every morning, I dreaded checking our bank account, knowing the balance was running dangerously low. We lived off of instant noodles and discount groceries. Luxury was having enough to eat twice a day. I had never known what it felt like to struggle before. But now it was our entire existence. I had never worked a real job before. My entire life I had been groomed to marry into wealth, to be an heiress, to never have to lift a finger. But now I was standing behind a cash register at a tiny convenience store, scanning items for impatient customers, my feet aching after standing for hours. "Move faster," my manager barked. "We're not paying you to stare off into space." I bit my tongue, swallowing my pride. This was humiliating. And yet, when I received my first paycheck, a small wrinkled slip of paper that barely covered a fraction of our rent, I felt something I had never felt before. Independence. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Stress changes people. And as much as Liam and I loved each other, the pressure of our situation was beginning to wear us down. We started arguing over everything. "Did you remember to pay the electricity bill? I thought you were going to cover it. We can't keep living like this. I'm trying, okay?" Nights that used to be filled with laughter and whispered dreams turned into silence. We still loved each other, but love wasn't always enough. And I could feel something between us starting to crack. I was out of options. Liam was doing everything he could, working long shifts, applying for better jobs, trying to get his startup off the ground. But I was drowning. So one afternoon I did something I swore I never would. I called my mother. The moment she answered, her voice was cold. "I was wondering how long it would take before you came crawling back." My grip on the phone tightened. "I'm not crawling." She sighed dramatically. "Let me guess. You need money." I bit my lip. I hated that she was right. I hated that I was standing in the back room of the convenience store, surrounded by shelves of canned food, begging for help. "We're struggling," I admitted. "And I thought, maybe." "You thought wrong." Her words hit me like a slap. "You made your choice," she continued. "You chose him. You chose poverty. And now you want us to fix it for you?" My stomach twisted. "It's not like that." "It is exactly like that," she interrupted. "And we won't be part of it. You are no longer a member of this family, and we owe you nothing." Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't let her hear me break. "Goodbye, Mother," I whispered. I hung up before she could say anything else. And just like that, I knew. I wasn't just struggling. I was truly alone. That night, I sat on our tiny second-hand couch, staring at my hands. Liam came home exhausted, dropping his work bag onto the floor. "You okay?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I called my mother today." His eyes darkened. "What did she say?" I forced a smile. "That I made my choice." Liam's jaw clenched. He hated my family, not because of their wealth, but because of how easily they had discarded me. "I know things are hard right now," he said, sitting beside me. "But I swear to you I'm going to make something of myself. We won't always live like this." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But at that moment, hope felt like a luxury we couldn't afford. So I nodded, resting my head against his shoulder, trying to ignore the gnawing fear in my chest. Because no matter how much we loved each other, I couldn't shake the thought. What if this was all we would ever have? But what I didn't know was that Liam wasn't just a dreamer. He was a fighter. And soon the world was about to see exactly what he was capable of. Life didn't magically get better overnight, but something shifted between Liam and me. The struggles were still there, the exhaustion still weighed us down, but somehow through all of it, we found ways to hold on to the love that had brought us here in the first place. I started noticing the little things. The way he always made sure to bring me a warm cup of tea after my shifts. The way he kissed my forehead before leaving for work. The way he never let me doubt even for a second that we were in this together. The days were long, the nights even longer, but in those small moments I found strength. There were days when I missed my old life, when I walked past boutiques filled with designer clothes I used to own, When I saw women my age stepping out of expensive cars with not a single worry on their faces. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel envy. But then I'd remind myself that those women had never known what it was like to be loved the way Liam loved me, to be chosen over wealth and status, to know that the man by their side wasn't there because of what they had but because of who they were. I had traded privilege for something real, and even on the hardest days I refused to regret it. Liam worked tirelessly, throwing himself into his startup idea every free moment he had. I didn't always understand what he was building, but I understood the fire in his eyes when he talked about it. His mind was always running, sketching out ideas, coding late into the night, watching tutorials on how to market a business. He was relentless, refusing to accept that this life we had now was all we would ever have. I admired him for it. Even when I was too tired to believe in the dream, he believed enough for both of us. Our apartment was still a mess, our finances still a disaster, but our love never wavered. We learned how to celebrate the little victories. A successful pitch to an investor, a freelance gig that paid just enough to let us splurge on a cheap takeout meal. We made our own happiness in ways my old world would never understand. Sitting on our tiny balcony, sharing a carton of noodles and watching the city lights, I felt richer than I ever had in my family's mansion. There were moments of doubt, of exhaustion, of wondering if we would ever escape the cycle of just barely getting by. But I knew one thing. Liam had never given up on me and I would never give up on him. And so, we kept pushing forward, building something out of nothing, proving to the world that love was worth more than money. What I didn't realize then was that the world was about to take notice of Liam in a way neither of us ever expected. Liam had always believed in himself even when no one else did. Even when we were barely scraping by, when our bills were overdue, when we lived off instant noodles and prayers, he never stopped working. I would come home from my shifts at the convenience store to find him hunched over his laptop, eyes burning with exhaustion but still refusing to stop. His startup, his dream, it was more than just an escape from poverty. It was his proof that we hadn't thrown everything away for nothing. I had always admired his determination, but at the time, I didn't know just how much it would change our lives. It started with a single email. One investor, someone who had come across Liam's pitch online, wanted to meet. I remember the moment he told me, the way his hands trembled as he held his phone, disbelief written all over his face. "They want a meeting," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. I had never seen him look so hopeful and terrified at the same time. That meeting led to another. And another. Suddenly, Liam was no longer just a man with a dream, he was a man with potential. I saw the change happen before my eyes. The long hours became even longer. He wasn't just coding and researching anymore, he was meeting with investors, pitching his ideas, networking with people who actually believed in what he was building. The same man who once had to beg for freelance gigs just to pay rent was now sitting across from billionaires, convincing them that his company was worth betting on. And they listened. Because Liam wasn't just ambitious, he was brilliant. The first investment deal changed everything. It wasn't enough to make us rich overnight, but it was enough to breathe. Enough to move out of our cramped, suffocating apartment into something better. Enough to pay off the debts that had been dragging us down. Enough to hope. I remember the first time we stood in our new apartment. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours. Liam held me in his arms that night, whispering against my hair, "This is just the beginning." And he was right. The next few months passed in a blur. His company took off in ways neither of us had expected. More investors. More partnerships. More recognition. I watched in awe as the man I loved transformed before my eyes. Not because of the money, but because he was finally becoming the person he had always known he could be. The world was finally catching up to what I had seen in him from the very beginning. There were moments where it felt unreal. Moments where I woke up and expected to find myself back in that tiny apartment, struggling to make ends meet. But this was real. The struggle, the sacrifice, the nights we spent wondering if we had made a mistake, they had all led to this. Liam wasn't just succeeding. He was thriving. And for the first time since leaving my family behind, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Vindication. We had proved them wrong. But what I didn't realize was that success had a way of attracting people from the past. And soon enough, the same family that had disowned me would come knocking on my door. Liam's success didn't happen overnight, but once it started, it felt unstoppable. Investors lined up, companies wanted to partner with him, and suddenly his name was appearing in articles about the next big entrepreneur. I watched it all happen from the sidelines, still unable to believe that the man I had once shared a one-bedroom apartment with, the man who had lived on instant noodles with me, was now being invited to elite business events and private investor meetings. Our life transformed faster than I could process. First it was a new apartment, then a new car, then a company headquarters with his name on the door. Liam didn't just build a business, he built an empire. The software he had been working on, the one he had poured his soul into when we had nothing, had revolutionized an entire industry. The man who once had to beg for opportunities was now turning down multi-million-dollar offers. And with every new milestone he reached, I felt something deep inside me settle. We had done it. We had survived. And we had built something together. But success had a way of attracting the people who had once turned their backs on us. And as soon as Liam's name started making headlines, I should have known what was coming next. I received the first call while Liam was in a meeting. My phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in years. My mother. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. They had ignored me for years. No birthday calls. No check-ins. Not even a single message to ask if I was okay. They had erased me from their lives the moment I chose Liam over them. And now they were calling? A part of me wanted to ignore it. To let them stay in the past where they belonged. But curiosity won. I answered, keeping my voice cold. Hello. There was a pause. Then my mother's voice, soft, hesitant. Darling. It's been too long. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Has it? She sighed. I know we haven't spoken, but your father and I have been thinking about you a lot lately. We've been meaning to reconnect. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. No, you haven't. You saw Liam's name in the news. There was a beat of silence. Then she said, well, yes. We heard about his success. And we're proud of you. Both of you. Proud? The same people who threw me away like I was nothing were suddenly proud of me? I forced a breath through my teeth. What do you want, Mother? She hesitated, but I could already hear it in her voice. The careful wording, the faux warmth, the way she was trying to sound like a mother who had never abandoned her daughter. Your father and I were hoping we could arrange a dinner. Just to talk. To catch up. I nearly laughed. A dinner? After years of pretending I didn't exist? After years of silence? And yet, a part of me, the part of me that had spent years missing them, longing for their approval, wanted to say yes. But I wasn't the same girl they had disowned. I was stronger now. So I said, I'll think about it. And I hung up. When Liam came home that night, I told him everything. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You don't have to see them if you don't want to. I nodded. I know. But something inside me whispered that this wasn't over. And deep down I knew, if I agreed to that dinner it wouldn't be a simple reunion. It would be a test. A test of how much I had really changed. And a test of whether I was finally strong enough to face them. The dinner invitation sat in the back of my mind for days. I told myself I didn't care, that I had moved on, that I didn't need their validation. But the truth was, a part of me, one I hated to admit existed, still wanted to know if they had changed. If they regretted what they did. If they ever truly missed me. Liam never pressured me about it. He had always been the kind of man who let me make my own choices, who never told me what to do, even when he knew I was struggling with something. But when I finally told him I was going, he didn't hesitate. I'm coming with you, he said. I shook my head. I don't think they want to see you, Liam. His hazel eyes darkened. That's not my problem. I knew he meant it. They had never been kind to him, never given him the chance to prove himself. And now, after all these years, after everything we had been through, he wasn't going to let me face them alone. So we went together. The restaurant they chose was exactly what I expected. An over-the-top 5-star venue with crystal chandeliers, gold-rimmed plates, and a wine list that probably cost more than my first job's entire yearly salary. It was the kind of place my family used to take me to when I was younger, where they entertained business partners and flaunted their wealth. Nothing had changed. Except for me. My mother was the first to see us. She stood up, a forced smile on her perfectly made-up face, her manicured hands smoothing down her designer dress. Darling, she said as if we had never spent years apart. Look, well. My father barely spared Liam a glance before looking at me. Sit. No hug. No warmth. No acknowledgement of the years they had spent pretending I didn't exist. I should have walked out right then. But I didn't. I sat. Because I needed to hear whatever it was they had to say. The conversation started off awkwardly polite. My mother asked about our home, about our travels, about Liam's business. My father nodded stiffly as Liam spoke about his success, as if he hated acknowledging that the man he had once called a nobody had built something greater than he could have ever imagined. And then, just when I thought this was going to be nothing more than a meaningless conversation filled with fake smiles, my father finally said what he had been waiting to say all night. "You've proven yourself," he said to Liam. "I can admit that now." Liam raised an eyebrow, but he said nothing. He was waiting. We both were. My father exhaled, glancing at my mother before turning his sharp gaze back to me. "It's time to come home." My stomach tightened. "Come home." My mother smiled, reaching for my hand like she had any right to touch me. "Yes, darling. We've been talking and we think it's time we put everything behind us. You've married well after all. You and Liam are successful now, and our family should be united again." I pulled my hand away. "So, let me get this straight. When I was struggling, when Liam and I were living in a rundown apartment and working ourselves to exhaustion, I wasn't part of this family. But now that we have money, suddenly I belong again?" My father's expression didn't change. "You chose to leave and we let you. But circumstances have changed. You belong with us." I clenched my jaw. "No. I belong with Liam." His lips pressed together. "You can have both." Liam finally spoke then, his voice calm but firm. "Let me make something clear," he said. "We don't need your approval. We never did." My mother sighed, shaking her head. "Darling, this isn't about approval. It's about family." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Family? You abandoned me. You threw me away like I was nothing. And now that Liam is successful, you suddenly want to rewrite history?" They didn't answer. Because they knew I was right. My father straightened his posture, his voice turning cold. "We're giving you a chance to come back into the family, to be part of something greater. If you refuse, then that's your choice. But don't expect us to offer again." I looked at Liam, at the man who had stood by me through everything. The man who had loved me when I had nothing, who had built a life with me when the rest of the world told us we would fail. And I realized something. I didn't need this dinner. I didn't need their acceptance. I didn't need anything from them at all. I stood up, smoothing out my dress. "Then don't offer again." My mother's eyes widened. "Darling." "No," I cut her off. "You made it very clear where I stood in this family years ago. I have my own family now. One built on love, not money. And I don't need yours." Liam stood beside me, his hand finding mine. My father's face darkened. "You're making a mistake." I squeezed Liam's hand, smiling. "No. I made the best decision of my life the day I chose him over you." And with that we walked away. For good. Walking away from my parents that night should have felt like the final step in my journey. I should have felt free, victorious even. But instead I felt exhausted. Years of anger, resentment, and heartbreak had built up inside me, and even though I had finally closed the door on my past, the emotions lingered. Liam held my hand as we walked through the city, his warmth grounding me in reality. "Are you okay?" he asked, his deep hazel eyes filled with concern. I let out a slow breath, squeezing his fingers. "I will be." And I meant it. The days that followed were a mix of relief and reflection. I replayed the dinner conversation in my mind, wondering if I had done the right thing. But every time doubt crept in, I looked at the life Liam and I had built together. A life that was ours, not theirs. I thought about the nights we had spent in that tiny apartment, dreaming of a future that felt impossible. I thought about the way he had always believed in us, even when I had moments of doubt. And I realized something. I wasn't angry that my family had come back into my life. I was angry that for a split second, a tiny part of me had considered their offer. A part of me still longed for their acceptance even after everything they had done. But now I understood, their acceptance had never mattered. What mattered was the life I had built, the love I had chosen, and the happiness I had found without them. One afternoon, as Liam and I sat on the balcony of our home, overlooking the city that had once felt too big for us, he broke the silence. "I know this wasn't easy for you." I turned to him, watching as the wind ruffled his dark brown hair, his profile sharp against the golden light of the setting sun. "No, it wasn't." He shifted slightly, tilting his head toward me. "Do you regret it?" I thought about that for a moment. About what I had given up, what I had lost. But then I thought about what I had gained. A love that was real. A life that I had built with my own hands. A future that no one had handed to me but one I had earned. I shook my head. Not for a second. Liam smiled, and for the first time in days I felt something settle inside me. Peace. But just when I thought we had finally put the past behind us, a new storm was brewing. Because my parents weren't just willing to let me go. They had one final move to play. And I had no idea what was coming next. I thought that walking away from my family that night was the end of it, that they would accept my decision and leave me alone. But I should have known better. My parents weren't the kind of people who took rejection well, and if there was one thing they hated more than losing, it was losing to someone they considered beneath them. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a news article. Liam and I were having breakfast in our kitchen, enjoying the rare quiet of a morning where neither of us had early meetings. He was scrolling through his phone while I sipped my coffee, my mind still replaying the dinner with my parents, when suddenly his entire body tensed. "Babe," he said, his voice unusually serious. "You need to see this." He turned the screen toward me and my stomach dropped. It was an article about us. Or rather, an article about me. Disgraced heiress rejects wealthy family for a self-made billionaire. My face was splashed across the front page. A picture of me and Liam at a gala event we had attended months ago. The article painted me as a reckless, spoiled girl who had abandoned her family only to conveniently marry a man who became rich. They twisted the truth, making it seem as if I had used Liam to maintain my status after my family had selflessly welcomed me back. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the article, each word slicing into me like a blade. Liam's voice was calm, but there was an edge of controlled anger beneath it. "You know exactly who did this." "Of course I did. My family. This was their way of punishing me. They couldn't force me back into their world, so instead they decided to drag me through the mud." The worst part. The comments under the article. So predictable. She wouldn't have stayed with him if he wasn't successful. Another gold digger pretending to be in love. Her family was right to disown her. It didn't matter that none of it was true. People believed what they wanted to believe, and now my name was being dragged through a scandal I had never asked for. I felt sick. Liam reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "They want you to react," he said softly. "They want you to lose control. Don't give them that satisfaction." I let out a shaky breath. "Then what do I do?" His hazel eyes burned with determination. "You hold your head high. And you remind them who you are." And that's exactly what I was going to do. Because I was done playing their games. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to win. I wasn't going to let my family rewrite my story. For too long, they had controlled the narrative, shaping the world's perception of me to fit their agenda. But this time, I wasn't the helpless daughter they had cast aside. I wasn't a naive girl who let other people dictate her life. I was stronger. And I was going to prove it. Liam and I sat in his office, a sleek, modern space overlooking the city we had once struggled to survive in. His company had grown into an empire, and the man sitting across from me, calm, sharp, calculating, was no longer just my husband. He was a leader, a visionary, a billionaire. But more importantly, he was my partner. "They want to destroy your reputation," Liam said, his voice even. "So we take control of the story before they can." I met his gaze. "How?" He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "By reminding the world exactly who you are. Not a disgraced heiress. Not a gold digger. But a woman who built a life for herself without them." I took a deep breath. He was right. This wasn't about defending myself against their lies. It was about telling my truth. And so we fought back. Liam arranged an exclusive interview with one of the most respected journalists in the industry. It wasn't a desperate plea for public sympathy. It was a declaration. A way to set the record straight on my own terms. When the day of the interview arrived, I walked into the studio not as a victim, but as a woman who had nothing to prove. The interviewer smiled at me as I sat down, cameras rolling. "There's been a lot of speculation about your relationship with Liam," she said. "People say you left your wealthy family only to marry a billionaire. What do you say to that?" I smiled, but there was steel beneath it. "I say that people love a story where a woman's success is tied to a man's. But what they don't know is that when I left my family, Liam and I had nothing. We struggled. We built this life together. And I never once doubted that he would succeed, not because of money but because of who he is." The interviewer leaned forward. "And what about your family? They claim they tried to welcome you back." I didn't flinch. "They disowned me when I needed them most. And when Liam and I found success, they suddenly wanted me back. That's not love. That's convenience. I saw the shift in the interviewer's eyes. He understood. And when the interview aired, so did the rest of the world. The backlash against my family was swift and brutal. People saw through the manipulation, the hypocrisy, the way they had abandoned their own daughter and then tried to reclaim her when it suited them. Suddenly the narrative had changed. I wasn't the villain in their story anymore. I was the woman who had proven them all wrong. And I had never felt more powerful. But my parents weren't done yet. Because if there was one thing they hated more than losing, it was losing to me. I had expected my family to retaliate. After all, they were used to controlling everything. Their image, their wealth, their influence. But what they weren't used to was losing. And after the interview, that's exactly what they had done. For years, they had convinced themselves that they were the ones in power, that I would eventually come crawling back, begging for their acceptance. But I hadn't. I had built a life without them, found happiness without them, created something real without them. And they couldn't stand it. So of course they made one last desperate move. It started with a call. Not from my parents, but from my brother. I hadn't spoken to him in years. Not since the night I walked out of that mansion with nothing but a suitcase and Liam's hand in mine. He had been my father's shadow, the perfect son, the heir to the family fortune. I had always wondered if he ever questioned their decisions, if he ever missed me the way I sometimes missed him. But now, hearing his name on my phone screen, I felt nothing. I hesitated before answering. What do you want? There was a pause. Then his voice, deeper, colder than I remembered. We need to talk. I scoffed. We? Since when was I part of the we again? This isn't about the family, he said, ignoring my sarcasm. It's about you. About Liam. That got my attention. I exhaled sharply. What about him? Another pause. And then, they're planning something. Something big. I stiffened. Be specific. I don't know the details, he admitted. But after your interview, our father was furious. He said if he couldn't control you, he'd control the way the world sees you. My blood ran cold. Liam walked into the room then, noticing the look on my face. What's wrong? I put the call on speaker. What are they trying to do? I demanded. My brother sighed. There's talk of an investigation. A financial scandal. Something they can pin on Liam to ruin his reputation, make it look like he built his empire on something illegal. Liam didn't react, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hazel eyes darkened. I clenched my fist. That's ridiculous. His company is built on hard work, real, legal, honest work. My brother's voice was grim. You know they don't care about the truth. I swallowed hard. Why are you telling me this? Another pause. Then, quietly, because I don't want to see you get hurt again. It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. Because my family had just declared war. And I wasn't going to lose. Not this time. I had spent years believing that walking away from my family was the hardest thing I had ever done. I was wrong. Because fighting them, standing my ground against the people who had once controlled my entire world, was harder. They wanted to destroy Liam. Not because he had done anything wrong, not because he was a threat to them in any real way, but because he had proven them wrong. Because he had taken the life they had told me I would never have without them and built it from the ground up. And because I had chosen him over them. But they underestimated something. I wasn't their obedient daughter anymore. And Liam wasn't a man they could break. The moment I told him about my brother's warning, he didn't panic. He didn't let fear control him. He simply looked at me, his hazel eyes steady, his jaw set in determination. Then we fight, he said. And so we did. The rumors started fast. Anonymous reports questioning Liam's business practices, whispers about illegal dealings that never existed, accusations that were fabricated from thin air. But we were ready. Liam had built his company on transparency and hard work. We had receipts, records, and a legal team that was 3 steps ahead. The media tried to spin the story, but the facts were louder than the lies. And when the investigation into Liam's company revealed nothing but a clean, successful business, the scandal backfired. Hard. Instead of ruining Liam, it exposed who was really behind the false accusations. The powerful family that had once been untouchable was now being dragged into a mess of their own making. For the first time, my father wasn't in control of the story. And he hated it. I was sitting in Liam's office when my phone rang again. My father. This time I didn't hesitate. I answered. His voice was cold, controlled. Are you happy? I leaned back in my chair, feeling something inside me settle. Yes. A long pause. Then, you've made quite the enemy today. I smiled. No. I made a choice. And I won't regret it. Another silence, longer this time. I imagined him sitting in his grand office, gripping his glass of expensive whiskey, realizing, for the first time in his life, that he had lost. That man will never be one of us, he said finally. And I laughed. Because he still didn't get it. He never needed to be, I said. He built something better. We built something better. I could almost hear his jaw tighten. This is the last time we speak. For the first time the words didn't hurt. I had already mourned the loss of my family. This wasn't grief anymore. It was freedom. I exhaled. Goodbye, Dad. And I ended the call. For good. Years ago when I walked away from my family I was scared. Scared of losing my safety net. Scared of struggling. Scared that love wouldn't be enough. But standing in the home Liam and I had built, watching our son run across the yard, laughing as Liam scooped him up into his arms, I realized something. I had never lost anything worth keeping. Because I had gained everything that truly mattered. A family built on love, not money. A life built on trust, not control. And a love story that had survived everything. Liam walked over, wrapping his arms around me as we watched our child play. His lips brushed against my forehead, his voice warm. No regrets. I smiled, leaning into him. Not a single one. As I had chosen right. Not wealth. Not power. But happiness. And I would never look back.